Hello and welcome to She Leads Collective podcast. I'm Mary Gregory and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is a space for honest conversations about what it really means to lead as a woman today and how we can all show up with more courage, care and clarity. You'll hear from inspiring women, powerful allies and bold truth tellers who are changing the game, not by playing tougher, but by leading smarter, softer and stronger. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the She Leads Collective podcast. What happens when the path you were expected to follow isn't the one you choose, and the one you do choose puts you in rooms where you were never meant to belong? Well, my guest today is Fara Butt, Managing Director of Shire Beds, a family manufacturing business she helped transform from the inside out. Fara began her career in education on a path towards headship, shaped by a strong upbringing in a family of 5 daughters, where achievement and independence were non-negotiable. But life and leadership rarely follow a straight line. Pulled into the family business, Fara stepped into a male-dominated industry she initially found daunting. What followed wasn't just a career shift, but a reimagining of what leadership could look like, blending the empathy of a teacher with the commercial rigour of business and the courage to challenge industry norms. From painting the trucks pink, to shifting a business from turnover to profitability, to changing who feels they belong on the factory floor, Fara has quietly but very powerfully reshaped both culture and performance. And now, as she looks towards legacy writing and her role as president of the National Bed Federation, she's asking an even bigger question around her impact, legacy and broadening her identity. Fara, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Mary. It's lovely for me to be here.
It's lovely to have you here and I really appreciate you giving up your time. So I'm going to kick off the conversation really to explore your background and how that's influenced what you've actually ended up doing in business. So you grew up as the eldest of a family of 5 daughters with parents who were very clear about their expectations and what success looked like for you. How did that affect you growing up?
As you said, Mary, success and achievement were really non-negotiable. And I mean that in the nicest way, really, because we were all expected. There were 5 of us as we were growing up, 5 girls. I was the eldest, and I had 4 younger sisters. And my mum devoted herself to being the best housewife and the best mother that she could be. And part of that meant that she was going to bring up her girls in a way that she could be really proud of. I think it came from the fact that she'd always valued education herself, but coming from a rural community, she didn't always have that opportunity. So she wanted to make sure that her girls had every opportunity to achieve in the educational sphere that they could. So she placed a very high emphasis on the importance of education and learning. I mean, this was also sort of demonstrated by the fact that while she didn't follow a formal education when she came to this country, she did attend a lot of ESOL classes, English as a second language classes. She learned how to drive. She learned how to, there were lots of other skills that she picked up. She was always very good at sewing, but she learned how to knit as well. So she always had a learning mindset. We call it that growth mindset now. So I think given that she had that growth mindset, that is what sort of set out her expectations of her daughters, that they also had to achieve because they had to grow and they had to flourish and they had to fulfill themselves. So I think that was her measure of success. It wasn't always as a formal success, that they had to achieve this or that and the other, but initially it was always about, them growing and flourishing. And that was important to her.
And you've described her as a tiger mum and a feminist. How has that shaped you as a woman and as a leader?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Mum expected us, as I said, to achieve and to do really well in our formal education as well as learning things out of school. She wanted us to flourish in every aspect of our lives. And that gave us the confidence to believe in ourselves. I think had she not had those expectations of us, we possibly would have settled for something far less. But because she had those expectations of us, we always wanted to prove that we were good at what she wanted us to be good at, which was education in the first instance. So there's that desire to impress, that desire to show off to her, that desire to kind of please her as well. But in that respect, the fact that you achieve, you get a lot of positive feedback. It's good for your own sense of self as well. So, the more you achieve, the more you feel good about yourself and the more you go on to achieve further as well. So it became self-fulfilling, that sense of achievement.
Very positive cycle is what I'm hearing as well. And your parents made a lot of sacrifices for you as you were growing up because they were immigrants and obviously starting a life here in the UK. How conscious were you of that when you were growing up?
We were conscious that my father worked extremely hard. He came to work in the mills. He worked in the mills for long hours. This was before our time, but when we were growing up and we saw him going out to work initially on the buses, and then he had his own sort of taxi business and then his own factory, we saw him work very, very long hours to make sure that he provided for his family. We saw our mum work to maintain the house as immaculately as she could. And that had a huge effect on us, that we saw two hardworking parents around us. So hard work became part of just our normal everyday.
Yes, it was your ethos.
Absolutely.
And you trained to be a teacher with a very clear path ahead in terms of your career. What did that represent for you at the time?
When we were growing up, when we moved to more formal education, which was whether we were going to go to university, my mum at that point had it clear that she wanted 5 different careers for her 5 girls. And being the eldest, she saw that I was good at teaching my younger sisters. So we it wasn't ever discussed or formalised, but I sort of fell into the kind of teaching career. I was always doing it informally anyway, teaching my younger sisters, playing the teacher role at home, creating them little workbooks. And I loved doing it. So it sort of fell naturally that I would go on to become a teacher. I loved school as a child. I absolutely loved being at school. I loved the learning aspect of it. I would say I was fairly good at it as well. And I never really wanted to leave as well. So, what would be better than to carry on at university and then go back to school again?
Continuing something that you loved. So, was there ever any tension between what was expected of you and what you were drawn towards? Or did you feel that you were drawn towards what was expected of you?
For me, it was a natural career progression. I mean, I ended up doing what I absolutely loved. I'm not so sure about my other sisters. I think some of them might have had different ideas of what they wanted to do. One became a solicitor and a politician later on, and one went into the medical industry. I think she quite wanted just to be a hairdresser at one point. Is an accountant. One is a pharmacist. So there may have been slight tensions, but they went on to fulfill those ambitions, their secondary ambitions, their other ambitions in other ways. So it didn't really stop them from having both careers, the one that they had formally and the ones that they went on to pursue as their dream career as well.
Yes. So it sounds to one degree you had a career or you started out in a career in teaching that you really loved and that you were enjoying, but then you actually pivoted into then moving into the family business. And it didn't happen in a dramatic way. It kind of was more of a gradual thing that you moved into the business. What was actually happening for you in that point in your life?
I'd become head of English department at a secondary school, and I was working extremely hard. I then had my third child at that point, but the plan always was to go back to full-time teaching and pursue that career and become a deputy head and then a head teacher. However, during that time, we ended up doing a television programme with Sir Jerry Robinson, which involved the whole. And secondly, given that we were doing this television programme, I started, as I call it, tinkering around in the business, sort of looking at things that could be improved, could be done better. So it was done in the sort of gentlest of ways, really. And eventually it sparked my interest and I ended up doing it much more fully and, developing it as a second career.
Does sound like a real natural curiosity, particularly when you met Sir Jeremy Robinson. That sparked your curiosity even more, and that's how you managed to then get yourself more involved.
Yeah, so Sir Jerry Robinson came into the business via a television program, which we all enjoyed doing. And it was to look at the business and how to improve it. And I suppose we hadn't really worked on the business as a family. And that's what that program did. It allowed all the family to work on the business, to look at the good things as well as things that needed improving. And that, again, is that growth mindset that I talked about. The fact that we weren't just passively going and knocking nails and making beds and, putting fabric on things, but we were actually looking at how we could turn this entity to evolve, for us to grow this entity. And that was the thing that excited me about it, rather than the actual making of the products, which was the operation side, was continuing anyway. But that, we weren't getting involved in the operations, but we were getting involved with the transformation of the business.
And that's what you got really, really curious about. And I mean, I can't imagine what it must have been like because you had three children. You were working part-time as a teacher at one point, and tinkering is not the right word because you were doing much more than that. You were being very curious and looking at how you could make the business work most efficiently. How on earth did you navigate all of that?
Well, teaching was in my DNA and it was in my, it was part of me for such a long time that it seemed really hard to let that go. But getting involved with the business and realizing that actually, imparting learning and learning myself could still be sustained in the business world, that became a bit clearer to me. I didn't really want to lose that ability not to learn myself and not to impart learning onto others. And when I realized that there was opportunity to do that in the world of business as well, I was able to see that the similarities between both aspects of my career. Yes, there was a formal teaching that I was doing at school, but what I could do was to bring changes and bring learning to a greater number of people in the business. And I think that helped me navigate the two careers quite effectively.
And how did your husband support?
Well, initially, I think they felt that the business was something that they did because there was a lot of it was operations. It's a factory. We made things. There's a shop floor, and because we had followed that traditional migrants journey, where my parents, my father had worked in the mills, my mum had kept the house. He had never expected his children to work in what they saw as labouring work. They expected their children, migrants always expect the children to go and work in white collar jobs, which is what we all did. My husband had a slightly different approach. He had come from big business. He'd worked at big steelworks and he'd joined family business. And, he had the similar mindset to myself where he wanted to transform the business into something that was bigger and more professional. So given that we had the same objectives in mind for the business, I think it worked out quite nicely. And he was very supportive of me joining him.
And how did you work together in terms of caring for the children as well?
Children, they put all kinds of demands on you. Fortunately, at that time, the children were a little bit older. They were at school. That sort of division of labour at home, yes, at times it was hard work for us because there were three of them and they were quite excited, energetic young children. But he was very supportive at home. He understood that I had a career. He didn't kind of believe in the fact that his place was at work and my place was at home. We shared that bit of our life. He was very involved with the children's upbringing. We shared the pickups and the drop-offs. The fact that he worked, he had his own business, we could do that at times. So when I had my school days, he would do the pickups and drop-offs. And when I had the factory days, I could do them. So we could share a lot of it. We were very fortunate. We had our parents around. They did carry a lot of that. So, you sort of get through it really. But he was very supportive.
So it was real teamwork between you and your family.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, fantastic. So you moved into a very male-dominated environment. What did you find most confronting about that?
The factory at the time when I joined it was all male. There were no females at all in the factory at the time. And it was such a shock because at schools you do have a very diverse, staff. So when I joined, that struck me, and in a way that I thought I need to change this somehow, but I couldn't do it in one fell swoop. It had to be a cultural change. It had to be, a change which people adopted and adapted to slowly. So, one of the first things that we did was my sister, following the program, joined with me and, we worked on it together. So there were the two of us. We started being more visible around the factory, which was almost initially a kind of a no-go space for women. We just didn't go out there for reasons, as I've said before. It was, it was a factory environment. Women weren't expected to be there. But we started walking around the factory. We just thought, well, if we do it, then we can start to bring other women into it as well.
So you made yourself visible pretty soon.
It was a visibility thing, absolutely. I then remained there. The low-hanging fruit was the office because it was a sort of separate area. So I started, when appointments became available, making sure that if there was an opportunity to appoint a woman, I would do that. We then started building a team in the factory, and I didn't want her to feel isolated as I had done initially when I first joined. So it was always building a team of women on the factory floor. So we now have women working on the factory, which is a huge transformation from where we were at the beginning. At the same time, the factory evolved as well. It's a more welcoming place. It now meets the needs of women as well. So in terms of a separate space for them, if they need to pray, if they need to eat, we have those separate spaces if they should require them, that they feel comfortable. In actual fact, women actually have kind of really integrated into the factory and into the teams that we have. And it's wonderful to see that really here, how we thought they might stay as a separate group, but they've actually absorbed the Shire culture and have become very much part of the Shire team. And that's really wonderful to see. But, we have women now who are in our sales force. We have women who are in the office. We had at one point, we had a woman driver as well. We don't at the moment, but if there's an opportunity, we will.
Because you have transformed it from being one that was solely male to actually being a very balanced workplace. How did that go down with the men that were there in the first place?
As far as I'm concerned, I think we still need to evolve and grow and reflect the population out there. 50% of the people in this planet, 51% are women, and therefore workplaces should try and reflect that. Because we did it gently and we did it in a natural way and we didn't sort of enforce it, whilst I believe that that's, equality is very important and diversity is very important. We didn't change it overnight. We did it in a natural way. And we took everybody along with us. I mean, there were some jokes around the fact that when we painted the trucks pink, people had a laugh and a joke about that, especially the men who wondered, whether it was probably going a little bit too far. But, we stuck to that. It was more of a marketing exercise rather than anything else. And they did understand that. But it's all been positively received. And the fact is that the culture was set from the top. If there was an expectation that, if I'm going to be walking around the shop floor, then women have a right to be on the shop floor as well. And because of that, it was just generally accepted.
That's very good. And I think what I also am impressed by is that you've utilised your teaching skills as well as your business skills here, particularly when you bring women on. So tell us a bit more about how your teaching skills helped you, particularly in the early days when you had women who were maybe feeling less confident about stepping onto the factory floor.
Yeah, I mean, teaching requires a lot of coaching. It requires a lot of support. I mean, there's a formal aspect of teaching, but there's so much more that happens in a classroom. And as I said, that becomes part of who you are as a person. So naturally, my door was always open to the women. My phone is available to them. If they have any concerns, they can call me. They know they can talk to me. They can raise anything that might be to do with work, but it might be outside of work as well. And I offer them that open door so that they feel very comfortable being in this place. And there are no subjects that are out of bounds for them. I'm not just their boss, but I'm there just to support them as well. And that's very, very important.
Yeah, so you're absolutely got their back. Now, I want to touch on the area of unconscious bias actually here, because you talk about at home you weren't aware of there being any bias because of your upbringing. You were a female-dominated family, 5 daughters, your mum and your dad. When did you first become aware that biases existed, and how did that change things for you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of gender bias, we were very fortunate that we grew up in a very female orientated household, and success was a huge expectation of us, and we achieved very well. And so I suppose we overcame a lot of gender biases through our early part of our life. However, there were sort of racial biases that we learnt to navigate. It was a time and an era. We might hear certain things, but certain approaches. And in hindsight, we now understand that there were not just biases, but there was sort of, some element of racism there as well. But again, part of the way we overcame that was to sort of smash some of those ceilings in our, achievements and prove that, we could be just as good and if not better. I think going back to my second career in business, because I was very fortunate in teaching, where an understanding of bias is much greater, because as teachers, we are imparting a view of the world to the next generation, which is fairer and which is more balanced and which touches upon some of those inequalities of gender and race, etc. So I think in my teaching career, I was fairly shielded from that. However, when I joined the world of business, I joined a very male-dominated environment. And I realized then that there were conversations I was not part of. And just slight things like sort of turning up to a board meeting and the men you knew had already had a conversation before you'd got there, because they were all sort of using the similar language. And you kind of thought, this isn't coincidence. This is because they've actually got a little clique here. And so that realization of gender bias became much more apparent in my business career than it was in my teaching career.
And how did you handle that?
Well, to be thick-skinned about it, what you have to do is you have to say, well, yeah, it's happening. Yes, I can't let this stop me from being in this room, and I can't let this stop me from putting my point of view forward, and I can't let this stop me from wanting to still have an impact and have achievement in this area of my life. So a lot of grit and determination, but that upbringing that we'd had probably trained us to be able to deal with situations like this.
That strong sense of self-belief would have helped, is what I'm hearing. And what does inclusive leadership look like in practice for you today on the factory floor?
Well, inclusive leadership is obviously making sure that everybody who we employ has been given the best opportunity to achieve. If I see that there are talents in people, to make sure that we develop those. It's about keeping good people and, progressing them. It's not just a simple, well, yes, I would like more women, represented. I would like a more diverse workforce, but it's also about developing skills and talent amongst my team as well. And so wherever we see that skill and talent, we need to make sure that we retain that for our company and for our business as well, and develop those people.
And I know that quite early on, when you were just getting into the business, you and your sister focused on profitability rather than turnover. How transformational was that for the business as well?
I had a huge learning curve, a very steep learning curve, when I moved from education to business. In education, you're very much shielded from the economic impact of things. It's done very different. If you want a project, generally, if the money is available, it happens. But you don't really worry about, whether there's money in the pot to be able to do that. Business is completely different. I was very fortunate that the sister I worked with was the accountant, and so her mindset is all about accounts and profitability, etc. So she taught me a lot. One of the first things she did was to reduce the business by 25%. She got rid of what we thought was our biggest accounts, because she said they were the least profitable. In fact, they were not just least profitable, they were actually making us losses. So that was a huge decision for us to make. However, we did that, and we realised we were more profitable, and that gave me the confidence to focus on that bottom line more than the top line very early on.
And that was quite transformational for the business as well, by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. And we've had to go back to resetting that particular mode of working every so often, because what happens in business is, you sort of go through periods of growth and you might take your eye off, the bottom line a little bit because you're so excited by the fact that you're growing. And then, you kind of come to the end and you realize, well, actually, yes, you might have grown at the top, but the bottom line isn't really performing as it should. So, every so often we would have to sort of look at some of our accounts and have a bit of a cull. But we weren't frightened to do that. In the past, before my arrival, I think it was all just about the growth. And I think we've now realised that it's very important to grow and make profit as well. If accounts are not beneficial for our business, or, they're creating losses, we have to look at them differently. We have to, adjust and amend them.
I also know that in the early days, you also lost an agent who wasn't happy working with women. How did that land for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of our biggest earning agents, refused to work with my sister and myself, and has said he refused to work with women. But and partly that was to do with the fact that we were women, but I think partly it was because she'd seen, very clearly that the agency was not working for us, and therefore, unless he changed, and he wasn't willing to do that, he didn't have a space in our organisation.
So it's a bit of a two-way thing then.
It was a two-way thing.
Okay. It's just interesting to see the responses that you get when a woman takes over the business, and how some people, I know it's a few years ago now, but just not receptive to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, we could have come out of that quite differently. We could have worked with the agent, and we could have transformed, looked at the accounts and looked at the ones which were perhaps doing well for us, and looked at ways in which we could have improved the ones that were making us losses. But he wasn't open to working with us at that point. I mean, that was the way that we, go about things now. If there are accounts that agents have that perhaps might not be working, we discuss these things, and we, kind of discuss them openly, and we look at ways in which we can improve. But the previous agent, he just wasn't prepared to take any advice, any discussion with a woman, really. And because we had taken responsibility for that aspect, we weren't prepared to let go of it and hand it back to, how it was done before, because we knew that that wasn't working.
It's not how you're going to be doing business going forward either.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to think a bit more about visibility and influence in the industry, because it's not just about transforming things at Shire Beds, but you've been very mindful and intentional around making yourself visible within the industry. You've made a conscious choice to step into that wider industry, which has included chairing committees and making sure that you built relationships that built your visibility. Tell us more about what prompted that.
So when I joined the business, one of the things I was very concerned about was whether I would continue to grow as a person whilst the day-to-day stuff can take on a kind of a routine. There isn't a great deal of additional learning that you can, well, I felt at the time that there wasn't a great deal of growth that I would get from the business. So I started looking beyond the immediate business, and I started looking at trade organisations and, the wider business around, bedding and sleep. So the National Bed Federation is the industry's federation, and I got involved with them. They do a show. So following the show, I got involved with the marketing committee. I very quickly began to chair that marketing committee. I then went on to the board of the National Bed Federation, and my time on there is now moving on to leading the National Bed Federation as the president from May this year.
That's fantastic, and congratulations on that. For women listening today who maybe feel like outsiders in their industry, what has helped you claim your space?
I suppose it's just that sort of grit and determination to continue to learn, to feel that you belong, to continue to feel that you can actually make a difference, and to actually not feel that even if it doesn't look like you belong here and there are no people like you, and like we talked about, there have been rooms and spaces where there were no women when I first joined the industry, that you still sort of find somewhere deep down, that desire to carry on.
Yes, and there's something about being sure of your contribution, that you are there to make a contribution, and making that the centre ground rather than about your gender.
Absolutely.
And you talk about the sector has around 26% female leaders at the moment. What do you think still needs to shift? Because that's still very below the 50-50 that we
Absolutely.
experience in the world as a whole. What do you still think needs to shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as in every career, we've got to have more role models that are visible. We've got to sort of make some of these places inviting. I think the industry has to change and realize that actually there isn't an equal representation of women on boards and in places of influence, and therefore we need to make sure we create those. We've got to bring more people. It's an industry that doesn't particularly attract women as well. So, it has to start at school where, we have to make it attractive to females and, young women as well. So it's a sort of multi-pronged approach, really, where we, sort of try to every angle.
Do you think your background in teaching and education could actually be helpful in making it more attractive to women when they're going through school?
Yeah, I mean, we work with organisations that encourage women to join STEM careers as well, and that's through the work that I do with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and we have events that promote STEM learning to young people and particularly girls as well. So yeah, absolutely, we've got to actually work on young children and change their mindsets quite early on.
Fantastic. And I mean, Farah, one of the reasons I asked you onto this podcast is you were a fantastic role model for not having to have one career, but you've now had two careers, and you're already talking of a third career as a career in writing. So you talk about wanting to write your parents' story. What feels important about that for you now?
I'm very fortunate that we still have our parents, and the older you get, the more you realize that they've had an incredible journey themselves in ways that perhaps you didn't value when you were younger. And I want to capture that not just for myself, but for further generations to come as well.
Yes.
It is a moment in history as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that experience of that generation of migrants from the 60s, I don't think has been captured properly. And so I think there's a creative project that needs to be done that is just beyond my own parents' story as well. But personally, I would love to be able to really capture that story and, just to write. I mean, I was an English teacher. I taught English at it right up to A level. And part of English teaching is reading and writing. And so therefore, most English teachers believe that they are writers and have a book in them. So I believe that there are several books that I would like to write.
So that's kind of the next steps for you beyond being MD of Shire Beds. You're going to become a writer.
Hopefully, I've got a few
Yes. And
things in
and
there.
and and the person who steps into your shoes as MD of Shire Beds, what would you hope that they continue of your legacy?
Yeah, so I mean, whilst it's a family business, I didn't come into the business without having proved myself elsewhere. And we have maintained that with our own children as well. We have a business, it's a family business. However, our children have their own careers and they've got their own lives. And if they were to come and join the business, they would have to bring something to the party. They would have to bring something that would be valuable for it as well. So, and it might not just be my children, it might be, extended members of the family. So, that's one of the sort of succession options. But beyond that, the succession that we have planned is that we have people in the organization who are talented to run it. And so we have set up systems and processes, which is, my biggest objective now is to have systems and processes that run independent of who is running them. And we have managers who have got the talent to make sure that they run effectively. So, it's about taking that business to the next level now, that it doesn't rely on individuals, but it relies on us building the processes for it to be sustainable as a business long term.
And how would you describe the culture of the business now?
Well, I mean, it's moving to that more process-based culture. We have manuals for things. We have, SOP, standard operating procedures. We have teams. We have clear structures, organized. We have things which are documented very, very clearly in terms of specifications and product manufacture. All of that is all happening and has happened, in the last decade. And that has made the organisation quite strong. And I suppose it's part of our success, the fact that, we did achieve the ISO 9001, which is all about processes and the kind of strength of those processes. And we just continue on that journey.
And how does that support the inclusivity, diversity piece, which you're so passionate about?
Well, it means that, it's not in people's heads. The information is not retained by individuals. It's not something that I have to go to an individual and then try and defrag. But if it's written down in a process, then if the person is talented and if the person has those skills, it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman or whatever, background, then, as long as they've got the skills, they should be able to pick up that job. So it would create a much more equal playing field for people when we're appointing them.
And so we're coming to the end of our conversation. So I've got a couple more questions to ask just
Yeah.
before we close completely. So looking back on your career, what do you think your younger self, the one who trained to be a teacher, would say if they saw you now?
When you start out in a career, you almost sort of do a lot of pretend, don't you? That, when you first qualify, you kind of think, right, okay, I've qualified as a teacher, but now I have to really pretend to be a teacher. And I suppose the same thing when I moved into business, I had to pretend to be a businesswoman, sort of taught like I was a businesswoman. I don't have to do that anymore. And I think perhaps I need to say to my younger self, you don't need to pretend, because eventually you will be a great teacher and you will be, a successful businesswoman. So what I want to say to what I want to believe now is that, yes, one day I will be a great writer as well.
Oh, fantastic. I love that. So you can talk to your future self about
Yeah.
your writing. And what is one lesson you've learned about being a woman in leadership that you wish more people understood?
Well, it's that age old, isn't it? Don't let other people define you. Don't let other people's view of you affect your view of yourself. Just believe in yourself and try and cut that out, because there will be views from other people that as women, we feel quite subtly, but don't dwell on those. Just carry on with your belief and your direction of travel.
Yes. Thank you so much, Farah. Your wisdom is coming out in spades today and really, really appreciate you sharing it with us. And you are the most amazing real model of how you can have a squiggly career. You start with one career, but you end up with another, and you've got a third one coming up round the corner as well for you. But what a great stand you are for enabling gender equity in the workplace as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the She Leads Collective podcast. If this episode resonated with you, follow the show or share it with a friend and leave a quick review below. Or leave us a comment. Change happens through conversation, so let's keep this one going. Listen out for the next episode and join me as we keep lifting the lid on the stories that matter. Take care and keep leading with heart.